It's really interesting the way we take life so seriously, and we've been taught to take life so seriously. I certainly learned, I think at a very young age, that being serious somehow gave me some kind of credit, probably particularly at school, but also maybe at home. I often watch parents and very serious about educating their children and making sure that everything's on track. And so we pick up the message that it's good to be serious. And being lighthearted is sort of free time, it's fun time, but it's not really the real thing. I don't know if that's the case for everybody, but I think it's quite prevalent. And so it becomes a habit to be serious, for some people to be quite intense, especially I notice around work and around business. People play at being serious as if other people will then take everything more seriously and therefore do a better job. And bosses play at being very serious, and it's all seems to me to be a bit of an attempt to make themselves important. And also it's a bit of a way of handling the pressure and the fact that often people don't really feel like working, for example. And so you sort of get into serious mode. You put on serious mode at the same time as you put on your suit in the morning and get ready for work and get ready for, you know, this 8 or 10 or however many hours it is of stuff that you have to do. And then in theory, you come home, you take your suit off and you take off the seriousness. But of course, very often that's not the case because you're used to being serious by now. And so you're serious at home as well. And then you don't really want to be, but you don't know how to be different because you've spent so much time practicing being serious. So lightheartedness is actually a really high state of consciousness. It's a much higher state of consciousness than being serious and heavy. On the scale of consciousness, on David Hawkins' scale of consciousness, apparently it measures at about 600, which is the level of prosperity, true prosperity. It's the coming close to the, it's not, I'm sorry, I think prosperity is at 660. 600 is at the level of inner peace and coming very close to prosperity and not that far even from enlightenment. So lightheartedness is absolutely on the path to enlightenment, whatever that might mean. And there are many different interpretations, I think, of what enlightenment really is, but we don't need to go there to be lighthearted. So I really encourage you to have a look at yourself and where you treat life really seriously and question why you might be doing that. What do you think you might be getting from being so serious about everything? Lots of people are really serious about the news, for example. And it's actually clearly totally understandable why you might be serious about the news. First of all, the news is almost entirely negative, and negative things seem like worthy somehow of being serious because they're all the bad things that are happening and the bad things that could happen in the world. But it's really important to remember that the news doesn't tend to tell you all the good things. So being very serious about the news is giving energy to a biased perception of life. It's actually giving energy to, when you give energy to something, you create it, you make it stronger. So being serious about the news actually makes all the negativity stronger, which is probably not what you really want to do. So it's not a good idea to take the news so seriously. You don't need to ignore it. I'm not suggesting that. But if you want to contribute to the making the world a better place, then find a way to be lighthearted even with the news. because your lightheartedness contributes a positive light kind of energy that will lift the energy of everything. And if you do that in relation to bad news, it will, your lightness, your lightheartedness will actually directly connect with whatever that bad news actually is. So let's say there's been some disaster that's happened in the world. If you can find a place to be lighthearted about it, that lightheartedness will connect energetically with that event that's happened. And maybe somebody there will experience a bit of lightness, or somebody who's there to help will access a little bit of extra energy so they can help more. And that's quite simply more valuable than contributing to the woe and the sense of disaster and the misery of the situation, of which there's already plenty. You don't need to contribute any more to that. Now, that might seem a little bit immoral. It often feels immoral to people to feel light about situations that are very heavy for many people. But really and truly, we want people to be able to find the lightness. We want the people who help people in heavy situations to be able to find lightness, because it's better. It's simply better. It feels better. It is better. It adds nothing to a serious situation to have a really long face and to be really serious yourself. So it's good to spend some time practicing finding the lightness and being lighthearted and seeing what effect it has. You know, you can do it as a scientific experiment and do it in little ways at first and see what difference it makes. See what happens if in a situation where you'd normally be terribly serious and terribly self-important, maybe at work, you decide to be a little bit lighter. You don't have to joke with everybody if they're all being very serious. You don't have to completely mess up the atmosphere. Or you could, if you are important enough and you have the right to do that, you could do it. You could play with that and see what happens. But if you don't want to do that to begin with, just try little things. Where there's a serious conversation to be had with a team member, for example, what happens if you lighten it up? What happens if you bring your human being into work with you? You might just find that they cooperate with you that much more if you're able to be lighthearted about it. You might find that you can get your message across, whatever it is. Maybe you need to discipline somebody. Maybe you need to have a rather difficult conversation. But in the end, you both know that you're playing games. You both know that somehow you're playing the boss and they're playing the employee, or whatever the situation is. At a soul level, you're not superior or inferior to each other. You're two human beings who've taken these roles on to play. And somewhere inside you, you know that. And when you acknowledge that with another person, you give them permission to acknowledge it too. And if you're the boss, you're the one who really probably needs to start this, because everyone else will take a lead from you. Just imagine for a moment what it would be like if you could all simply be more lighthearted. And when somebody's done something wrong, you can say so, you can do something about it, but you can keep a light heart, and maybe even they can have a light heart. When your heart's light, it's so much easier to correct your behavior. When your heart's light, it's so much easier to get results. It's so much easier to do business, and it's so much easier to work. And a little bit of humor here and there, some enjoyment, some fun, some sharing of pleasure. None of those are going to go amiss. People are going to relate to you more easily. And people are going to relate to themselves more easily, because in the end, when they mess up, they don't usually like themselves very much. And if they do something where they don't even realize that they've messed up, you know, and they don't know, being really serious doesn't usually seem to help. because it puts a kind of heaviness around your energy. And the thing about energy, especially new energy, is that it's incredibly light. And so when you put this kind of mantle of heaviness around you, and you're trying to have a conversation with somebody where you have a message to convey to them, a message is energy. And when it's cloaked in heaviness and seriousness, that energy doesn't travel very well, because energy is light. So if you want to communicate something to somebody so they'll actually listen and be able to respond to it, lightheartedness is a much stronger way of doing it. You can keep a serious face if you need to, but if your heart is light, if you're not saying, oh, I hate doing this, oh, I can't stand this kind of situation, but you just take it lightly. It's something you've got to do, you're going to do, it's part of what you are, it's part of what you've chosen to show up for. You don't have to take it seriously. You can simply be light about it. See what happens when you do that. And see what happens with your children when you're light-hearted, even when they've done something naughty. It's so tempting to be serious, to play the game, and you know you're playing a game with your kids. To play the game that you're really serious and you're really angry with them because they didn't do the right thing. They were misbehaving, they're being naughty, they're messing around when they're supposed to be doing something. But the funny thing is that the more serious you are and the more heavy you are, the more they mess around. Or maybe they start to pretend because it's a bit scary, you know, when mummy or daddy is really being angry. It's a bit scary, so you have to toe the line. But it makes it more and more difficult to cooperate because the energy is so disturbing that your children want to get away from it. They don't want to sit there and listen to you when you're being angry or serious. All they want to do is escape because the energy field is so unpleasant. And they have to stay there usually because it'll get even worse if they run away. So their energy is completely disrupted and they don't know anymore how to follow the instructions. I remember when I was a little girl, my mum used to be really nervous. I was talking to her about it a couple of days ago. And she said that when she was a teenager, her mother was always angry with her and angry with everybody. And she made this promise that she would never, ever get angry with other people. But as a result, the anger was still there and the nervousness was still there. She didn't express it directly at us. She didn't shout at us, but she shouted at everything. She shouted at the stairs and she shouted at the kitchen and the cooking and the packing up. We were always moving because we had we lived in one house in the week and then we went somewhere else for the weekend. And I just remember that all I wanted to do was go to the other end of the house so I would get away from that energy field because it was so unpleasant and so disturbing to me. I didn't know how to react in it. I didn't know how to behave anymore. It literally disrupts all the messages in your system. So it's a really, really good idea to just really look at what happens, how your kids behave when you get angry or heavy or serious with them. Because if you look very observantly, you might find that they don't actually respond very well and that they don't get better at doing the thing you're trying to correct them on. In fact, quite the opposite. They'll usually do more and more of what you don't want them to do. Whereas if you acknowledge the humanity between you and you engage with them and you show them, sometimes, you don't really know what you're doing either. You're just trying to do the best for them. Share that with them. Help them to understand you, because they will. They make a lot of effort to understand you. And try to understand them better as well. And be light-hearted about it. Because being serious is not going to make them do what you want. Being serious is going to, on the surface, make them do what you want. And when you're not looking, they'll do whatever they want. And it gets to a point where even when you're looking, they're not able anymore to do what you want. And so they blatantly, openly do what you don't want. And that's one of the reasons so many teenagers in the end become so sullen and uncooperative, because the energy that they're surrounded with is just so difficult for them to deal with energetically, and so unpleasant and so confusing to their internal systems, because it's not coherent in itself, that they simply don't know how to react anymore. Lightheartedness arises out of coherence. It arises in an energy of love and understanding and of high awareness. And that creates an atmosphere where people can cooperate with you. They can understand where you're coming from. They can take responsibility for themselves and for whatever it is that they're supposed to be doing. Because when we're lighthearted, we receive the message, we receive the energy in a very uncluttered way. And so we're able to respond to it. The response is natural. And it's easy. And it's a relief. It's actually easier to cooperate with somebody than it is to fight with their energy. So lightheartedness is much more powerful than you might imagine if you're not very good at it. It's not only for fun times, and it's not only for kind of joking around. It's actually a way of making a bridge between you and other people, and a way of making a bridge between you and your life. It lightens your life. It makes it so much easier and so much more enjoyable. It's really not necessary to be as serious as most of us think it is. So, yeah, I encourage you to try it out. See what happens. Really take it as a scientific experiment and observe. Do little things at first. Times when you would normally react, let it go. Just let it go. Times when you would normally be heavy, see what happens when you allow yourself to be a human being. Stop playing the game of being terribly serious and important, and be a human being. Lighten your heart. Enjoy it all a bit more. Feel the relief, but especially notice the results. I'm quite sure that when you observe what happens, you'll do more of it.